Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers, we're back with, you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around for a while. I got a fun video for you. Today we're going to be talking about some more modern underrated games. People seem to really like it when I talk about games that flew under the radar, they're hidden gems, or they just didn't get enough recognition. So here's another video talking about 10 modern games from the last 7-8 years or so of gaming that I feel like didn't get enough recognition. Like, people said they were good, they got decent reviews, they might have even gotten decent sales, but over the years I just don't see that many people talking about these, and I thought they were better than how we may have initially perceived them. This is all just my opinion, of course. You can let me know down below of some underrated games, or maybe some games you think deserve a second chance. Either way, let me know down below. Let's get right into it. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Let's talk about some games. Now, when thinking of underrated games of the last, I'd say 10 years, Far Cry Primal was a game that definitely popped up into my head. Now, I know that the Far Cry series and Ubisoft games in general aren't everyone's cup of tea, but when it comes to this game, I would say it is rather underrated. I'd say it's probably the most underrated Far Cry game, maybe the most underrated Ubisoft game. On the surface, it appears to be just another Far Cry game with like a prehistoric skin, but if you've actually played through this game, then you can tell that yes, this game has a bit more going on than it's just Far Cry where you're throwing sticks and stones. And I feel like all these years later, this game is actually still pretty impressive. When it comes to the presentation, obviously that still holds up, but where this game is impressive is in the world building, the fact that they created a whole new language for this game, and just generally how creative this game got. There's not a lot of games that take place in this kind of era, this kind of setting or environment, and I thought that was really unique. It's still unique all these years later, and it actually tries to do something interesting with it, with this game providing an intriguing plot and characters. I'm not going to act like it's Hollywood award-winning stuff here, but I liked it. When it came to the gameplay, yeah, it's not exactly innovative. It still is an open world Ubisoft game. You'll still get dropped into this pretty big environment that was low-key just a reskin of a prior Far Cry map, but I feel like they do enough things to differentiate itself from the other Far Cry and Ubisoft games that I still found this game and its gameplay loops to be engaging and, most importantly, fun. Taking out the guns and the vehicles really does switch up the gameplay as you're focusing on a lot more basic projectiles, melee weapons, and taming animals. I actually really like the whole animal taming mechanic and think that there's some really cool set pieces that involve the animals. And of course this mechanic would come back in other Far Cry games, but it wasn't done like how it was done in Primal. I also like the survival elements. I feel like the Far Cry series really doesn't have any survival elements, but this game, it absolutely does. And again, the whole thing felt just really unique. Sure, you could be reductive and boil it down to it's just another Far Cry game with a little skin over it to make it feel unique and different, but this game just had a different atmosphere, different tone, completely different vibe, and it just kind of hit different. All these years later, there hasn't been another AAA game to ever attempt this setting, this kind of world, or anything like this, and Far Cry's probably never going to try this again. And while this game certainly does have issues, I feel like the positives really do outweigh the negatives here, and I think that if you're someone who is looking for a somewhat different kind of open world experience, or maybe just a completely unique setting that isn't really explored much in video games, then you're gonna like Far Cry Primal. Of course though, if you're sick of Ubisoft games, open world games, or you're tired of the Far Cry series, I can't say you're gonna love this game all that much, but all these years later, I still can appreciate what this game was doing. So our next underrated game is Dragon Quest Heroes 2. I know it might seem silly to have a Far Cry and a Dragon Quest game on a list like this, but hear me out. Dragon Quest Heroes 2 came out in 2017, and I barely saw anything about it. From Koei Tecmo fans, from Dragon Quest fans, I didn't see like anything. Even when Dragon Quest had its big push in the West with like Dragon Quest 11 and some of these other Dragon Quest games, including the upcoming remake of 3, I still don't see like anybody talking about Heroes 2. I see more people talking about Builders than Heroes 2. And I'd say Builders is underrated as well. So Dragon Quest Heroes 2 has really nothing to do with the first game actually at all. It's a completely unique story in the Dragon Quest setting. and it sees, as you guessed, our heroes going up against evil and then a bunch of other famous Dragon Quest characters coming in. And it was developed by Omega Force, the people who make all of the Dynasty Warriors games, but this is not a Dynasty Warriors clone. It has a lot of similarities to the Dynasty Warriors series. You do fight a lot, and I mean a lot of enemies, but I would say this game is more of like an action RPG, as it's got a little bit more going on under the hood. I would say it's more comparable to Persona 5 Strikers than, say, the One Piece Pirate Warriors series. series, but when it comes to the combat, it's actually pretty good stuff. There's a good amount of characters and they all play extremely different from each other. No two characters feel the same, and you can actually really level up and upgrade your characters. They'll get new moves and abilities, and yeah, I think they all feel decently different from each other, and it actually felt like, you know, different characters here, which is not something I can say about several other Dynasty Warriors games where a bunch of the characters feel the same. That's not the case here. This game's structure and pacing is also different from the other Warriors games. It's not just a bunch of missions. It actually does have these open environments you can explore. There's even side quests and other things to do. It's not an open world game, but it's cool that there are these open areas for sure, and the side quests aren't total dog crap. So, you know, that's appreciated. The main story and its missions are still pretty good. I like the writing. It's very whimsical and Dragon Quest-like. And the game absolutely nails the feel of Dragon Quest. Not only is it like the best looking Dragon Quest game of them all, but it's got that aesthetic, the classic music's there. It feels very much like a Dragon Quest game. The combat is fun, you level up your characters, exploring the environments is decent enough, the questing is good, and there's some really good spectacles that show up here. It can also be incredibly satisfying when you just completely wipe out a massive amount of enemies in the span of like 5 seconds. That is fun stuff. And over the years, I feel like this game has just really not gotten any credit from Dragon Quest fans, from Warriors fans. It just seems kind of forgotten. And that's a real shame. I would say this game is easily in my top 10 Warriors games. It was a ton of fun and I couldn't put it down once I started playing it. So our next game is another one that I feel like has just totally fallen out of the public conscious, and that is Life is Strange True Colors. Now, I know the Life is Strange series is totally not for everybody either. It's a very story-driven, narrative-focused series that focuses more on creating characters and interesting plots and worlds versus, you know, engaging gameplay or anything like that. But I can get down with this series. I like it, even if sometimes it has the vibes of hello fellow kids, I'm cool like you, but, you know, they're not as cool as me. Skibbidi, Rizzler, Gyat. But anyway, True Colors is a different kind of experience for the Life is Strange series. It doesn't really connect back to the other games. I mean, a character or two might show up from prior games, but it doesn't really mean anything. It stars newcomer Alex Chen, who moves to this new town to just try to get a fresh start, but then she realizes that she can experience the emotions of others and ends up trying to solve some big mystery about this town, its people, etc. I actually think the story is pretty decent in this game. It's not the most predictable thing in the world. The writing, yeah, it's decent enough. It's a chill experience that I can get down with. I'm not going to act like, oh, this is one of the best stories in a game in the 2020s, or it's even the best story in the Life is Strange series. It's not either of those, but what it does provide is a chill, different time that's rather down to earth. When it comes to the gameplay, it's a rather basic adventure game. You talk to characters, you examine things in the environment, and you can experience the emotions of others to get new dialogue options or solve very, and I mean very basic puzzles. This game is more of like a graphic adventure than, say, a point-and-click adventure game. It's pretty basic stuff here when it comes to the gameplay. You'll be in the same few environments the entire time, but at least the writing and the dialogue is good enough that it kept me interested throughout. I think the pacing is pretty solid as well. The game does not take way too long to finish. It knows when to end. I also think the game has some pretty good themes that aren't touched upon in games all that much. Look, I'm not going to act like the writing is masterclass, and these choices aren't all that impactful outside of maybe a slightly different ending, but again, sometimes you need a down-to-earth chill game after playing so many games that require like 1000% attention, or you need a thesaurus to understand every aspect of the plot. Like, no, I just want to kick back, relax, play something easy for a little bit, then I'll get back to my big crazy Dark Souls, Elden Ring, massive RPGs or games that require a ton of attention. This, I feel like it was a nice change of pace, and I didn't really hear many people talk about it when it came out, and I definitely don't hear like anything about it now. Even in the Life is Strange community, I feel like I don't hear a ton of people talking about it, but I enjoyed it. Now, when thinking about underrated games that I haven't talked about, one that came to mind pretty quick was Transformers Devastation. Now, there have been plenty, and I mean plenty of Transformers games throughout the years. Some of them have been pretty bad, but a lot of them have actually been good. But I feel like when people talk about good Transformers games, Devastation is rarely ever brought up. What's always brought up is the Cybertron games, which, yes, are fantastic, but this game is like just as good as those games. It's a very different type of Transformers game, though. It was actually developed by Platinum Games. Yes, Bayonetta, Nier Automatopoeia, and Astral Chain Platinum Games. And this game, oh, it absolutely has the Platinum Games combat. Immediately, I'll just say this is a character action hack and slash beat 'em up style game, and the combat is excellent. It is the best combat of any Transformers game. There's actually a bit of depth here. There's a bunch of combos. You'll be switching in and out of vehicle form to do these attacks, and it's good fun. There's a number of playable characters here, and they all play extremely different from each other. Optimus and Bumblebee, they're gonna feel different. A Dinobot shows up, he feels completely different. I like how the characters actually, again, feel different. They have unique move sets, and then there's a bunch of gear you can get in this game. It actually has like Diablo style loot mechanics, which is really odd, but the whole loot and gear system was pretty decent. It was an unexpected touch. The game isn't that long. It's as long as most of Platinum's games, you know, like the 5 to 10 hour mark, and it ends before it gets old. But thanks to it being so short, it's actually incredibly replayable. I've played through this game several times because it's just so much fun. The game has a great presentation, a fantastic soundtrack. Again, the combat is actually good. It's got great pacing, and there's just a ton, and I mean a ton of fan service to old Transformers, like 80s and 90s Transformers. And sure, while this game doesn't have a ton of depth compared to some of other Platinum's games, and the levels can feel a bit samey, and it can feel like a few set pieces were a bit samey, this game was still immensely enjoyable. I got it like right when it came out. I knew it was going to be cool. It was pretty awesome. Sadly, it has been delisted, but you can go get the physical disc for pretty cheap. But if you're at all interested in Transformers or this game looks good, go get it before it gets really pricey. But I do have a little faith that it might actually get relisted. Hasbro seems like they want to actually bring back older Transformers games, so fingers crossed. And so here I've got a pretty unconventional pick, but I've wanted to talk about this game for quite some time, and that is Amanda the Adventurer. This is a small indie horror game that is totally not for all horror game enthusiasts, but if you like a certain other horror game series that may or may not involve animatronics, I think you'll be able to pick up what this game is putting down. It's more of a throwback to primitive 3D and late 90s, early 2000s educational television. So the game certainly has a pretty specific demographic in mind, but even if you don't fall into that demographic, I think you'll still be able to appreciate what this game does. It takes that and puts a unique horror spin on it. And that's all I'm going to say when it comes to this game's setup, premise, or story, because that really is like the selling point of this game. The game actually has some really good twists and turns, and it actually has some interesting backstory as well. And when it comes to this game's gameplay, it's actually much more of like an adventure game with puzzles rather than a survival horror game. Yes, there are horror game aspects, but you're not managing any resources here, and you're really just trying to figure out how to proceed next. The whole game takes place in this attic, and while that might seem really lame at first, they absolutely make the most of this space, and you come to actually really appreciate this attic. And it didn't bother me at all that they really only created one environment for the game. There's plenty of other things going on here. It's not the longest experience. If you want to try to get all the endings, it's maybe 4 or 5 hours at most. But again, what really carries this game is its premise and its presentation. I particularly resonate with this game because I actually did grow up in that demographic I spoke of earlier. I grew up watching educational television like Dora, which is what Amanda is clearly based off of, and I did grow up watching shows with really primitive 3D like JJ the Jet Plane. So it hit hard for me. It's not going to hit as hard for many other people, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that don't care for this game, but I liked it. And I certainly think it's an underrated little gem that doesn't get talked about enough. It's actually getting a sequel this year, so I'm really excited for that and excited to see where the story goes. So we got a little bit of a hot take here. Here's a game that came out a few years ago to pretty negative reception, but I've actually always been a fan of it, and that is Gungrave Gore. Now, the Gungrave series in general has never had a stellar reception, but I still do enjoy the games, particularly this one. While it is rather repetitive and it's not refined in several aspects, I still thought it was pretty fun. So what even is it? It's a mix of a third-person shooter and a character action game. There's plenty of combos, but a majority of the game is you using guns, and you just go fucking nuts with the guns, honestly. It's like if Reaper from Overwatch had his own game. Then again, Gungrave has been around a lot longer than Reaper has, but I guess that's a good way of describing it. Like, you just go berserk with these guns. There's tons of different weapons to use, there's special moves, there are some hack and slash elements. You actually do get to play as another character who is mostly hack and slash focused, but that part's pretty awful. But a majority of the game, you really are just shooting everything in sight. You're juggling enemies, you're trying to keep combos going, you're trying to keep enemies alive so then you can combo into the next area with them. Like, you'll have some absolutely ridiculous combos, hundreds of hits or shots or whatever you want to call it, and yeah, I had a pretty good time keeping these combos going. I will say the beginning of this game is pretty rough. There's this train level near the very beginning that is just terrible, where you don't have enough time to get past the train. But I can assure you, once you get past that part, it's a bit more balanced. This is a challenging game at times. It will absolutely kick your ass, but it can be very rewarding. I'm not going to act like the mechanics are all that deep, and there's a reason a lot of people didn't care for this game. It gets old pretty fast. If you aren't digging the gameplay from the first 10 to 20 minutes, you're not going to like the game because nothing really changes here. Like, you go through some different environments, and the game does have a decent length to it, but the gameplay really is almost untouched the entire time. What you're doing the first hour of the game is really what you're doing the last hour, which again is just shooting the absolute hell out of everything. The presentation was nice, the soundtrack is decent, the story is barely even existent and kind of nonsensical. But hey, I actually did have fun with this one. I might be in the minority here, but I think that this is actually a decent enough game and easily the best of the Gungrave series. And so here's a game I could never give enough love to, and it is Maneater. If you're unfamiliar with this game, it's the shark game, like the shark game. While there might have been some games in the past where you get to play as a shark, like Jaws Unleashed and that Easter egg in GTA 5, none of them compare to Maneater. This is honestly everything I've ever wanted from a video game that features a shark. It was developed by Tripwire, the people who made the Killing Floor series, one of my favorite series of games. I love Tripwire in general. One day I'll have to do a video on them, but they did just a fantastic job with this game. It sees you, a shark, going up against a fisherman after he kills his mom, and you want to basically take out everyone that's ever meant anything to him. You start as a baby shark, no relation to the most viewed video on planet Earth, but as you eat more, as you kill more, you level up and get bigger and bigger, and finally you become just this big-ass bull shark and start just absolutely wrecking things. This game goes from 0 to 100 pretty fast. While at first you have trouble even taking out a crocodile and you're just nibbling on little tiny fish, by the end of it you are taking out boats, you are jumping onto the beach and eating people. Like, forget the beach, forget the water, you're just jumping around in neighborhoods, going around eating people, and it is as amazing as it sounds. You can be out of the water for a long ass time, you get a bunch of cool moves like turning into a torpedo, and using objects and other people as projectiles. Like, you'll be just absolutely fucking shit up, and you can get a bunch of different shark parts to really customize your shark. You can have it made of rock, or you can have it so it poisons everything. Like, there's a decent amount of customization here. When it comes to this game's structure, it is an open world game. It is different from every other open world game since it's almost exclusively underwater. It feels very alive, I will say that, but there's side quests to do, there's some collectibles, plenty of things to chew on. The game actually has like a wanted system similar to GTA, and they'll start sending out the hunters, who of course will start with spear guns, but eventually they'll get snipers and guns, which is pretty funny, and you'll just eat them all. This game, it was so much fun. I remember when I got it in 2020, I sat down and I played this game for like 12 hours straight. I got the platinum, I did everything. I love this game. I've come back to it many times after that. There's even a DLC, and the game just absolutely knew what it should have been. It has solid progression and pacing. It's incredibly rewarding, especially if you see just how big your shark becomes. It's fun, and it doesn't have a single ounce of realism to it, and that's exactly how I want it. I love stupid shark movies. I actually have reviewed over 100 different shark movies on this channel, and yes, all those videos are still public. I'm pretty sure nobody even knows at this point that I used to review shark movies. But yeah, over 100. I love this stupid shit. This game was all of those movies put together for just a perfect video game for me. Obviously, there's plenty of issues with this game, but I'm able to overlook all of them because it was just exactly what I wanted from a video game that features a shark. It just goes balls to the wall. It lets you go as crazy as possible. I hope we get a sequel, but if we don't, at least we got this magnificent, just straight up masterpiece of a shark game that I could never hype up enough. The game's been given away for free several times. It's probably on Game Pass and PlayStation Plus. If you haven't tried it and you like sharks, if you like my profile picture, you should check this game out. It is so much fun. And so here's the series I don't give nearly enough love to on this channel, and that is the Serious Sam series. Today we're talking about Serious Sam Siberian Mayhem to be specific, but I really do love this series. It's like my favorite series of first-person shooters. Ton of nostalgia with these games. But I feel like Siberian Mayhem has not only been kind of forgotten, but it's decently underrated, even in the Serious Sam series. Like, it doesn't reach the heights of first or second Encounter, but I thought this was actually pretty good, and it was way better than I expected. I remember when Serious Sam 4 came out a few years ago and was kind of disappointed by it. Like, it was alright, but it wasn't great, and Siberian Mayhem was really building off Serious Sam 4. It was actually made by fans as opposed to Crow Team, but it got Crow Team's seal of approval and got an official release by Devolver, and after playing through it, I actually liked it quite a bit more than Serious Sam 4. It was more to the point, and it felt like they understood what Serious Sam was about more than even Crow Team did for Serious Sam 4. So I'll actually talk about the game now and say that it is an old school styled first person shooter where you get dropped into these pretty big long levels and are told to basically kill everything that moves. You'll get swarmed by tons of enemies, you'll get tons of big guns, and you'll kill everything that has a pulse essentially, unless you're playing in co-op. Then you don't want to kill your co-op partner. These games are loved for how great the gunplay is, how the weapons feel, and how a lot of the encounters are designed. The encounters are designed in a certain way that keeps things really fresh, engaging, and you'll be using certain weapons against certain enemies. There's actually a lot of enemies, they're all incredibly varied from each other, and again, the encounters are just plain fun. And this game totally gets it. It has really solid level design, they've all got a good pace to them. The game in general has a great pace. You get some new weapons here that weren't in Serious Sam 4. They all feel really nice, they're fun to use, the enemy encounters are great, there's plenty of secrets, and I feel like the game is way more replayable than Serious Sam 4. What I'm trying to say is I like this game a bit more than SS4 if you couldn't tell. But enough about that. I'll just say that this is a fun, frantic, fast-paced first-person shooter that just has not gotten enough attention. When thinking about some of the best boomer shooters of the 2020s, nobody is talking about this game. And I think that's a real shame because it's actually pretty good and it's easily the best Serious Sam game since Serious Sam 3, which came out, wow, 13 years ago. I'm getting old. But hey, before you get too old, you should try this one out. So you thought Transformers was the only licensed game I'm talking about today? The answer is no. I got one more for you. It's SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake. Now this game came out early last year, and while there might have been some initial hype for it then, I feel like it's just kind of died off. And you know, at the end of the day, I kind of get it. It is a licensed kids game, but it absolutely can be played and enjoyed by anybody. This game is the real follow-up to Battle for Bikini Bottom that we all wanted. Obviously, there was the SpongeBob movie game, but if you've played that, you can tell that outside of the reused assets, it is a decently different game. This game also doesn't try to just appeal to new SpongeBob fans, it tries to appeal to all SpongeBob fans. There's plenty, and I mean plenty of fan service and references to the first 3 or 4 seasons that are all great. This game is hilarious. It legit is one of the funniest games I've ever played, just thanks to the fan service alone. As someone whose favorite TV show ever is SpongeBob, yes, I quite enjoyed this game. Shocker, I know, but there are plenty of SpongeBob games that I would say are garbage. This is not one of them. This very well might be the best SpongeBob game of them all. It is a 3D platformer, kind of collectathon, that feels like a platformer straight from the 2000s, and I mean that in the best possible way. It's not overly complex with a ton of combat and open world and skill points and progression or anything like that. No, it's just a good old-fashioned 3D platformer where they drop you into some pretty big areas, you got a decent move set, and you gotta go collect things. I really love how this game looks. It does run on Unreal Engine, and sure, it's not the most technically impressive game, but it's got a nice art style to it, and the music is decent enough. And then when it comes to the level design, it's actually well designed. It's fun to go through these areas. They really make use of SpongeBob's entire moveset. And speaking of, the moveset is pretty decent here. It does feel like an extension of Battle for Bikini Bottom. The controls are smooth. It's a good platformer. There's a set piece for every single level, so they all do feel decently different from each other. It's got a good length to it, the pacing is solid enough, and it was just a fun time overall. It's not a revolutionary or innovative 3D platformer, but it makes the most of the SpongeBob license. And when thinking about some of the best 3D platformers I've played throughout the last few years, oh yeah, the Cosmic Shake is totally one of them. It doesn't have the most crazy, diverse moveset, and it doesn't have this super complex level design, but it's just a fun, chill time that I was able to really enjoy. It's mad cheap now, and if you're someone who's ever even remotely kinda like SpongeBob, I think the game is worth giving a shot. It's not going to be the best or most original 3D platformer you play, but it's a good time. And the last game I want to talk about today is Double Dragon Gaiden. Now, the Double Dragon series is a series of beat-em-ups that have been around for a very, and I mean very long time. And they've been kinda all over the place when it comes to quality, but Double Dragon Gaiden, ooh, this game is really good actually. This very well might be the best of the entire Double Dragon series, and while I might have seen a little bit of hype for it when it came out, I haven't seen like anything on it in ages. I've not seen like a peep, not even a whisper, and maybe that's because beat 'em ups just aren't a very prevalent genre at this point, especially in gaming circles, but it sees up to 4 people really just kicking some ass. And what's great about this game, what makes this game as good as it is the combat. I mean, it's a beat 'em up. You would hope the beat 'em up gameplay is good. Oh yeah, it is so much fun in this game. There's actually way more depth to this game than almost any other beat 'em up I've ever played. Like, on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's all that more complex than any Streets of Rage game, but there's actually a ton of combos you can juggle, and I mean juggle the shit out of these people. And there's actually a decently different moveset. You can even switch between 2 characters here. There's a bunch of different characters to play as in this game, and they all feel incredibly different from each other. And so with that, the game is incredibly replayable. Just because you'll want to try all of the characters, you unlock a bunch of stuff every time you finish it. Like, the game isn't super long either. You can finish it in under 2 hours. So it really is one of those games that you can just keep booting up over and over, do a quick little session, play through the whole game, try a different character, unlock some new stuff, and you can just keep at it. There have been some really kick-ass beat-em-ups throughout the years that have gotten a lot of attention. The new TMNT game, Streets of Rage 4, and even the River City Girls games. But this game, oh, it is so much fun. It is legit some of the most fun I've ever had with a beat 'em up. I really just did not expect it. The presentation's nice, the soundtrack is pretty good, and you'll want to keep coming back to this one. It's not going to be a game you just finish once and call it quits. But hey, speaking of calling it quits, that's where I'm going to be ending this video. I talked about some underrated games, at least in my opinion. What do you believe are some underrated games? I'd love to know down below. If you made it to this part of the video, you can comment Cheez-It as in the snack. I'm really craving some Cheez-Its right now. So please support the Patreon so I can afford some Cheez-Its. I very much would appreciate it. With all of that, I hope you all have a great, wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe. Bye-bye.